Good morning. What would have happened if we had won that revolution in the 70s and had kept home economics? Our society would have been made up of the summation of family units. The role of government would have been to regulate parameters of competition, much like the Baseball and Football Commission. Our architects would have put us in our own houses. It would have been the common housewife and secretary and lawyer and plumber that would have been playing in that tennis tournament they have every September. Amateur athletics and professional citizenry, for want of a better way of saying it. Our society would have been made up of what would be considered normal, well-adjusted people, even though that's not a natural thing. The Pope holds the moral high ground, so I put the Pope in charge, and now I own the moral high ground, and I become my own man and a good citizen. And we would have, we would have had this huge middle class. Communist China started selling products, or they allowed China to start selling products, and they allowed people to start building factories in China right at the same time when all this was happening. So what would have happened if China came under our umbrella? Instead of building an economic system above our political, they would have come under our umbrella. They would have adopted the American dollar. They would have adopted home economics. Instead of a whole generation of people all wearing the same clothes, they would have had to have worn clothes that fit, then worn clothes that fit with a style. They would have been normal and well adjusted, and society would have been made up of the summation of family units, and with that, the same people who did all the producing would be the same ones who do all the consuming. And because of that, something terribly magical happens. Thanks to a gentleman named Adam Smith, him and the Catholic Church that came around and polished things up. Home economics is what we're talking about here. You can produce more than you consume. And because of that, let's say there were 25 million households in the United States, and let's say there was the same number in China. If it took, for example, 1 million people working in the auto industry to put that big American car into the driveway of our households, it would have only taken, for example, 1,900,000 people to put that big American car into the driveway of the Chinese household. And then something, magical happens. Instead of laying off the 100,000 people, you keep those people and you lower the amount of hours that they work. And with that comes leisure time. And that's how you get leisure time. That's what made the United States such a magical and wonderful place to live. People actually went to war for this. They went to war to get to the point where they had a 40-hour work week and you could retire at 65. They threw all that out. Now let's just stop and make observations. We'll just make one observation and then another. If you're that young man and you're working in a auto parts warehouse, you don't make a fraction of what they made in the 1970s. They made enough money to support a wife and children, and you don't come close to that. Let's make another observation. If you're that young gal who's beside herself because you have to put your child in a daycare center and go work in the factory or the hospital all day long, well, believe it or not, you're in the ideal world. According to Karl Marx and those guys, you're supposed to be in seventh heaven. You're supposed to enjoy putting your child in a daycare center and going off and working with the men and being equal and all those sorts of things. I don't think that's quite correct. And I don't think the word equal has the same meaning as we do over here. In fact, I know that it's the women's liberation movement, along with Harry the Hippie and Al the Afro, didn't do anything like that. They went in the other direction. They cashed in on it all, and they went and became the upper class, and you're now the peasant class. Let's keep this up. It's the communist Chinese. The communism is the prima donna intellectuals government. And they're actually the government of the international corporation. They just don't present themselves that way. In the United States, it was quite fashionable to be a communist or a Marxist. It's literally the government of the Ivy Leagues, and that's who they were. And quite frankly, they won. And they did win. The point is, they're all the same group. That phrase from the 1950s in the United States, they're the cruel, queer, atheistic, communist, and fascist, and nobody really cares what they call themselves. Let's keep this up. They caused you to have to work more and more hours to the point where you're living in poverty. They decided that you shall be a peasant. In the Bible, creating poverty like that is considered one of the very few unforgivable sins. And they justified their actions by saying they simply don't believe in the Bible, and you have no right to shove your religious views down their throat. Let's keep this up. I shall be a Yank. I shall be for God and country. The Pope holds the moral high ground. So I shall put the Pope in charge, and suddenly I become a Yank. Well, philosophical fancy pants me. Now that I'm a Yank, I'm for home economics. And that's what I have to be. You just have to start throwing all that stuff out and starting from scratch and start standing up adamantly for home economics. Well, let's leave things here. We'll see you on the other anecdotes.